Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden.
And I'm Irshad Manji.
And yes, I have Irshad co-splaining with me today in the studio. I always love having a co-splainer. It gets kind of lonely here at times, Irshad.
Oh, Danielle, you know, just know that, you know, there are a lot of people out there who are calling your name, even if you're not hearing them.
I don't know. No. Especially we're all going a little batty in COVID. I don't know, just having this hope now held out where I just now feel so impatient and I fear I will do something reckless.
When do you actually think you're going to get the vaccine?
I think I'm going to get the vaccine. Well, I'm almost embarrassed to admit this on air. I mean, what
almost
Joe Biden
being the
says, almost. Joe Biden says, like, we'll all have it by the end of May. I have discovered on the Washington, D.C., where I live, list, people working in information technology will be in the next phase, i.e. media. Now,
wow.
I've always known podcasters are essential workers.
That's right. They're not the poor cousins of daily journalists. No.
Right. This is important work that we do. And I am glad our government, I don't think the Trump administration would have recognized the media.
Well, and to be perfectly fair, Joe Biden never did say that we would all be vaccinated by May, but you know that America would have the necessary doses by the end of May. And what happens after that is God knows anybody's business.
Yeah, I just jumped. I'm so impatient. I just jumped on that small shred of hope.
Right. But, I think Canadians, by the way, Canadians in America should be the next group to be
because they're not getting
inoculated.
I mean, it's just finally rolling out in Canada, and mother is 85 and she hasn't gotten yet or anything. It's ridiculous.
God bless her. I hope that means though that she's in relatively good health, right? That
she is, but they just haven't one's mother is getting vaccinated.
Yeah, but I'd like to think that Canadians in the United States are essential.
I mean, that's right.
You know,
especially
we've
Canadian
got
podcasters.
This is it. We've got the know-how, right, to ensure that democracy remains alive and well in these United States,
or at least polite. It's
for sure,
for sure.
And will gladly make Putin for anybody out there who asks.
I will not gladly make that.
Oh well, okay.
Disgusting.
Shipping and handling to come at a cost, by the way, in U.S. dollars.
Well, it is important work we're doing today, and this is one of the many reasons I'm thrilled that you're on. Our guest is going to be Ayaan Hirsi. She's global human rights activist. She's been such a brave, outspoken critic of Islam, and Irshad, so have you. And
not of Islam. No. This is really, really, really important to me.
Okay. So explain, because you both go back into a world where you have come out, and phrase it how you like.
Yeah. So what I'm an outspoken critic of is the abuse of power that takes place in the name of Islam. Now, some out there may be thinking potato, but no, I'm really big on a particular tradition in Islam pronounced ijtihad. And that is Islam's own tradition of independent thinking and creative reasoning and debate and dissent and reinterpretation. And I have always been for reviving that tradition within Islam. And for me, as a result, I can stay a Muslim with integrity. I don't feel there is any reason to leave, because I believe that Islam has the raw materials to be a religion of decency. For her own reasons, Ayaan made the decision long ago that she needed to leave Islam. And actually, I'll tell you a story that I think people should know. Many, many years ago, Ayaan and I sat down over dinner in the Netherlands. She was still living there. Mm-hmm. And she was not yet known as an atheist. And she asked me, should she come out as an atheist? And I said to her, Ayaan, will you be able to sleep at night knowing that you're being authentic by coming out as an atheist? And she thought for a second and she said, I mean, that's what I am. And I said, then do it, sister. Do it. Because what other people perceive is less important than your mental and emotional and physical health. So don't be carrying on the charade, that you're Muslim is simply to allay other people's criticisms of you leaving. If you're an atheist, and I say this with the greatest of respect, God love you. Like, do it.
Well,
and,
maybe not God.
Well, I say with the greatest of respect, right? And shortly after that, in Islam, God, by the way, does not have a gender. It's not a he, not a she, but an it.
I just caught myself saying that too.
No, but again, I'm not calling you out for that at all. I'm just saying that there's so much about Islam that most people, including, by the way, most Muslims, don't know that allows me to stay within the faith. And have integrity doing so. But somebody who honestly believes that there is no God, but was raised Muslim, I absolutely defend their right to leave. To my mind, they are not heretics. They are not apostates. They are, like me, a child of the universe. Do your thing, sister. Do your thing.
Well, she has, as you pointed out, she was at one point in the Netherlands. I've known her for many, many years. Since she came to the United States, and love her. She had an extraordinary life, which we talked about on her podcast. If anybody wants to look it up, in June of 2018, we had Ayaan onto the program and talked about her life and her biography. So we'll be talking about her book today. But if you want to go back and do more deep diving on the person who Ayaan is, I urge you to go look that podcast up. But this book is, it's called Pray. Immigration.
P-R-E-Y.
Yes, exactly.
Let's be clear.
The atheist guy, Pray, P-R-E-Y, Immigration, Islam, and the Erosion of Women's Rights. And she's talking about mainly of the phenomenon in Europe of this wave of migrants and refugees that happened post-2015, and we'll talk about that. Many just young men, and many, as you say, not just Muslim, but radicals, or coming from societies where being a Muslim is observed very, can I say, crudely or
ignorantly.
Mm-hmm. Because there are billions of Muslims in the world, and they aren't doing the behavior that Ayaan discusses in this book. So we'll talk to her about that. But I'm very glad to have you here because you know her as well, and you've shared part of a similar journey. Can I say that?
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. We're both critics of mainstream practices.
She lived when she came to the United States. She, and I think still does, travel with bodyguards. Her life is constantly under threat. I think you were under threat for a while there when which was it your first book or was
Yes. Yeah. After my first book, I decided.
Say the name of the book.
Oh, The Trouble with Islam Today, a Muslim's Call for Reform in Her Faith.
Right.
Yeah. And I decided, about a year after I had to get a bodyguard, that enough was enough, that I was going to, wave goodbye to my lovely bodyguard and take my chances, but not because I wanted to be reckless. What I wanted to show young Muslims is that you can do the kind of speaking up and the kind of questioning that I'm doing without having to hire executive protection. Now, as my own mother said to me, and she's a devout Muslim, she said, but it takes only one person to off you, right? Mm-hmm. And I completely, appreciated that. But I was here to help, and I do emphasize the word help, inspire a movement of many more Muslims who would take it upon themselves to speak up for independent thinking in Islam. Again, a tradition that we have as Muslims, and against intolerance. And, I'm happy to say that, well, first of all, here I am, still vertical, mashallah, which means praise God. But also, I'm happy to say that, several years after I made that decision and traveled through much of the Middle East, I heard from many, many young Muslims in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Algeria, Lebanon, Jordan, even Syria, before the civil war, that they were sensing a real upheaval coming. And lo and behold, the Arab Spring happened. And yeah, it failed. But something, again, our listeners need to appreciate is that many movements for individual liberty, freedom of conscience, and democracy in Europe also failed before they succeeded. Mm-hmm. And what I really appreciate about the Arab Spring is that the wall of fear was finally broken. That is the first step to then moving forward as a society.
Right. But just also in context with Ayaan, when she was in the Netherlands, she immigrated there from Somalia. Mm-hmm. I mean, her story of escape and escaping an arranged marriage, and she suffered genital, mutilation.
Yep. Awful.
She got to the Netherlands. And then not only did she learn Dutch, but she became a parliamentarian. Mm-hmm. And she made a movie with Theo van Gogh, a kind of artistic movie. But critical of Islam. And Theo van Gogh was murdered in the streets and with a knife by a Muslim assailant. And on the knife, sticking into his body, was a note saying that they were coming for Ayaan next. And that's when she had to go into hiding. Mm-hmm. And then she came and we managed to come over to the United States. So. Right. So that would be. I mean, I think if in Europe the situation is different, and we've seen much worse attacks on people in Europe who have. Well,
and one of the two major attacks on me and my supporters happened actually in the center of Amsterdam when I was launching my second book there. And this was just before, ISIS really came into its own. And many of the young men who broke down the doors of at the community center where I was launching my second book, would go on to become members of ISIS. And they were shouting, takfir, takfir, which means execute, execute. But what's so interesting again, Danielle, is that, I decided to try something when this happened. I said to these guys in English, and they understood. I said, look, you are not in your house right now. You are in my house. So you will sit down and you will wait your turn. And I promise you will get your turn to have your say, but you must take your seat first. You know what happened? Half of them did exactly that. It's like they were lost souls.
Scary mother figure.
Well, but it was like they were lost souls. Yeah. That all they knew how to do was follow. Yeah. Right. Well, and I have to tell you, when I watched a lot of the video from the January 6th riots on Capitol Hill, I kid you not, I saw the kinds of facial expressions wanting the glory in an otherwise meaningless world that I remember from that crashing of my party in central Amsterdam. And again, we as human beings, we're wired in a way that that makes us irrational when we are looking for something to satiate our emptiness with. And that is I think the genius of, the jihadists. They don't judge the young men who come to them. In fact, they say, come one, come all, come with your questions. Whereas both by mainstream society and by their own elders, these men are judged.
Right.
So no wonder, they can thrive.
Right. And it's these men who have, since 2015, who are changing Europe. And this is what Ayaan's writing about in her new book. So let's bring on Ayaan right after this word from our first sponsor. By now, you've probably heard me talk about Prose, the world's most personalized hair care. Well, I want to share a few updates since using the custom formulas Prose sent me. Actually, full disclosure, I ran out of my personalized Prose shampoo because I forgot to reorder. So there was a week or so there where I had to use my old shampoo. And you know what? Suddenly my hair was more tangled after showering. I noticed nasty split ends and frizziness and dryness. And gone was the silky damp hair, beautifully conditioned, that I'd grown used to using my Prose hair products. That's because Prose knows there is more to you than just your hair type. Prose has given over 1 million consultations with their in-depth hair quiz, which is how I got started. Prose didn't just want to know my hair type or age, but also what zip code did I live in? What was my diet like? Because all of these random factors contribute to your hair's health. With their algorithm and over 50 billion formula combinations, Prose determines a unique blend of ingredients to treat your exact concerns. Prose also has a review and refine feature. Lets me tweak my formulas for any reasons, like if I were to change address or my hair color or even my diet. So if you're not 100% positive Prose is the best hair care you've had, they will take the products back, no question asked. Prose is the healthy hair regimen with your name all over it. Literally, my shampoo has my name on it. So take your free in-depth hair quiz and get 15% off your first order today. Go to prose.com/femsplain. That's prose.com/femsplain for your free in-depth hair quiz and 15% off. Ayaan, welcome back to the Femsplainers. It's so great to have you.
Danielle, thank you very much for having me. Lovely to see you and Irshad, and lovely to meet Kai.
Yes, Kai is on our call.
Thanks, Ayaan. Great to reconnect. It's been about 5 years since we last saw each other, and I believe when we did last see each other, we, along with a Chinese Uyghur leader, a female, we were all three being honored by the Tom Lantos Foundation for Human Rights. What a brilliant occasion that was. But it's been so long since I've had a chance to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to catching up as much as, discussing your book.
Absolutely, Irshad.
Great.
So do I.
Great.
And again, good memories of that occasion with the Lantos family.
Yes, indeed. So here's a very personal question to begin with for you, Ayaan. Do you ever get tired, honestly, of being described as brave?
I think that's a great question. I don't get tired of it, but I have taken to explaining to people that sometimes if you do what is so obviously right, you don't really need courage. And then I get gently educated. I'm now thinking about the cancel culture, for instance, where people say, well, if the threat is losing your livelihood, if you are never ever going to be invited, you lose your social circles, then you see that people in peacetime also need to express themselves, and for that they do need courage, they do need bravery. So I think my use of the word and my understanding of the word is evolving, and there are these differences when you're in places of crisis. That's a different kind of courage that's needed, as opposed to when we live the way we live today.
Ayaan, you mentioned cancel culture. Something that jumps out at me right away, and we'll get into the book in just a second, is that your book was published. It was not canceled. What do you make of that?
My book was published by HarperCollins, and I worked on it for, I would say, over 3 years. And in that period, I remember, for instance, my literary agent, Susanna Lee, whom you've met, talked to me about what's going on inside publishing houses, really big ones that had published books by George Orwell and that are now confronted with a mutiny from the younger generation, saying we don't want the works of people like J.K. Rowling being published, which is astonishing. But I haven't had that experience with HarperCollins. How can I explain it? I don't know. Maybe Harper's different. Maybe that particular imprint is different. Or maybe, Irshad, and I'm now trying to be a little cynical, maybe because I'm a Black female, it's harder to cancel me than if I were David Frum, for instance.
And he also publishes at HarperCollins. You may even have the same very brave editor. Ayaan, it is true. You are extremely controversial, and yet it shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to be "quote unquote" brave for what you are saying, because it is based on evidence. It is very factually documented. And let's talk about the book. So the Evening Standard, just to give our listeners a sense of the controversy out there over your new book, the Evening Standard wrote, for someone enamored with quote unquote Western civilization, Hirsi Ali should understand individual rather than group accountability for crime. She ends her book as she begins it, with scaremongering. Now that was a negative one. Positive one was the Wall Street Journal. It is a courageous, embracing book, even as it makes a reader's heart sink. Miss Hirsi Ali will win no friends among the virtuous elites for whom her entire discussion is forbidden. But she is playing her part in a rebellion that could shape the fate of Europe. All right, Ayaan, which is it? Why don't you take us through what the book is about and why you decided to do this now?
So if I take the Wall Street Journal review, it's written, first of all, by a male, Tunku Varadarajan.
Yes.
And I think what happened, and then the Evening Standard one is written by Mariam Namazi, and Mariam Namazi is, I thought, sort of in the same group with her, fighting against radical Islam. I have to say, I was very much confused by her take on the book. Why do they have these different outlooks? Here's my theory. I think that when it comes to fighting radical Islam, I was very much aligned with Mariam Namazi. But when it comes to the approach on capitalism, the place of the United States of America, I think Mariam and I part ways. And my only, and again, I'm speculating, but after I read her review, I thought she's upset with me, and also her Twitter posts. She's upset with me because I refuse to go down the path of socialism and the anti-capitalist approach to things. Whereas I think Tunku and I are much more aligned when it comes to the basic norms and values. There are things that I know that Tunku disagrees with me. He has put it in the review, and I think that is a fair criticism. I wouldn't use the word rebel, for instance. I'm not rebelling against anything. I've done my rebelling against my family and my culture, and I've rebelled against Islam. But when it comes to Western values, I'm really not rebelling against. I'm leaning into that. But it is now seen as a controversy to state the obvious. Irshad, go ahead.
Sure.
You've been confronted with this. Yeah.
Well, we all know that, groups, all kinds of groups commit violence against women. And it remains true that even in Europe, a woman is more likely to be assaulted by an intimate than by a stranger, let alone an immigrant. And yet, as Danielle pointed out, you cite plenty of data in your book. So tell us, why the focus on Muslim men?
And again, I state this very clearly in the book. Why do I focus on Muslim men? Number one, there is the scale. Just the sheer number of young Muslim men and what we in America call military age groups arriving in Europe. So just the scale. And if you then look at those numbers and you look at the history of the failure to integrate Muslim communities, particularly young Muslim men, you combine those two things. That is one reason. The second reason is because of that failure of integration in Europe of particularly Muslim minorities, right-wing populist groups take advantage of this and exploit it. They exploit it because the mainstream parties, groups, media put a taboo on discussing the very specific culture-related, religion-related problems that come out into the open. And finally, we have radical Islamist movements that are very well established in Europe, way more established there than they are here. And they, the Islamists, actually acknowledge that there is a problem of sexual violence against women. But their remedies, interestingly, are, wait a second, women should then cover themselves, stay at home, abide by the same coping mechanisms that Muslim women in Muslim countries have perfected and mastered. And so they're kind of giving the same advice to European women. They're giving, when European leaders talk to the Islamists and say, hey, so the European leaders will go to the mosque and talk to the imams and say, we need help. We need you to help us not only understand the problem, but in your sermons to deter these young men from behaving the way they are. The Islamist leaders say, well, don't sell alcohol. And women shouldn't be out and about the way they are. They shouldn't be dressing as they, and so on and so forth. So if you want to recapture the debate and take it away from these fringes, either extreme Islamists or extreme right-wing populists, then the mainstream should be talking about it. And that is, I try to, it's really, I see the book as a conversation starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I've always found it fascinating that religious fundamentalists, and that includes Christian fundamentalists, assume that men can't help themselves, that they're completely, you know, incapable of reining in their lusts for women, and therefore that it's women who have to, you know, change in order to prevent themselves from being assaulted by men. And I see, you know, a book like this as making the point that everybody, men included, have to be held responsible for, you know, how they treat one another. Most importantly, in this book, how men, you know, often treat women. So I really appreciate, you know, your point that, you know, men are big boys. And, you know, they ought to be held accountable for expressing themselves sexually. One other point that I really appreciate in the book, Ayaan, is that you say that the burden of fending off, you know, assaults from migrant men falls on the shoulders of poor women, yes. Women who can't afford to move out of neighborhoods yes. where, you know, migrant men are streaming into. And I must tell you, I really embrace this point. I remember, in Smith College, by the way, as you know, has been in the news lately. I remember almost exactly 10 years ago being a visiting scholar at Smith and getting a lecture from very wealthy Bangladeshi girls telling me about how oppressed they are and why I should therefore clam up and not be talking about, you know, inequality of women within the way Islam is being practiced. They had zero understanding of what oppression actually means. And so, again, this is one of those points that to this day is not being discussed enough, regardless of the background of women. It is mostly poor women whose voices need to be raised and frankly, who need to be fought for. So how difficult is it for you to get a hearing when you try to convey that point to women in the West, be it in Europe or in North America?
So Irshad, I totally appreciate the way you've framed this, because that's exactly what it is. And there are two issues here. One is that the misogyny is universal, but there is a difference that you and I see, and I know that Danielle sees this too, between Western societies where things have moved on and things are way better for women, and Muslim societies where we're still dealing with sexual repression, and we're dealing with societies where it is not just condoned but propagated through religion and through religious pillars and cultural pillars. It is misogyny that is kept in place, preserved. So there is a difference between Muslim societies, there's a difference between Western societies, and the different misogynies at play here. And then the second point is the class point. Yes, feminism in the West has actually achieved quite a lot. And I find breathtakingly a lot. So I'm a person who compliments Western feminists on what they've achieved. But if you look at 2021 today, you see three groups of feminists. One group, I call them the glass ceiling feminists. They really are eager to get women into leadership positions, shatter the glass ceiling, have women on boards, and so on and so forth. Again, totally laudable. The second set of feminists, those who say, let's focus on the imbalance between work and life. So if you want women to build careers, you have to start understanding and looking into and adapting, help them adapt their careers to the demands of life at home, pregnancy, children, all of that. And then the third group are these, I just call them for now, the woke feminists. And in a way, I'm puzzled by this particular group because they seem to me to be selling out women's rights and all of that when they get pushback from other groups and other activists. In this case, I'm thinking about this friction, this tension right now between women's rights on the one hand and transgender rights on the other. But there is no group, there are no feminist voices that are coming out against the class thing. Yes, you are absolutely right. The victims of the unintended consequences of immigration from Muslim majority countries into Europe affects poor women first and foremost. It affects immigrant women, and we looked away from those. But those immigrant women share neighborhoods with white women, native Europeans, who can't afford to move away from these neighborhoods and avoid those unintended negative consequences of immigration. And if we say, everything is just universal, and that is said by people like Mariam Namazi and others, well, misogyny is misogyny. There's no difference. Women are oppressed everywhere. Sexual violence is everywhere. And it's pointless to see a distinction between misogyny in the Middle East and misogyny in Europe. If you take that path, then I think you will find yourself saying, all right, I'm just not going to touch a subject. And then when it comes to the class issue, I don't know if the most powerful voices of feminism today either just don't see the problem, or it's just not their priority, or maybe, and here I am wading into very sensitive waters. I looked into the grooming gangs in the United Kingdom. Yes, you do have to explain to Americans that there were organized groups or semi-organized groups. Most of the perpetrators were originally from Pakistan, or their parents are from Pakistan. They actually probably are British citizens who were born and raised there. And they were exploiting young white women. So they targeted low income, poor, young, some of them as young as 11 or 12 years old. So really children in this case. And this was going on in different places in the United Kingdom for decades. And the offenses that these men are charged with, they range from luring these girls with food to become girlfriends and having sex with them, to gang rapes and selling these girls out. These are very heinous crimes. And for a very long time, no one said, all the people who were in responsible positions to say something about, to do something about, to stop it, would not do it because they were afraid of being accused of racism, bigotry, and so on. And so when I say it is sensitive for me to wade into this, one thing as I was reading about these grooming gangs and their victims was that the phrase white trash came up many times. So were these girls just dehumanized? Were they not seen as worthy of protection because they're regarded as white trash? And I know that the UK is very much a class society. Other European countries tend to think of themselves as post-class. But I think the class issue is still there, and it is very strong. And it's very difficult to ask these questions. I'll give you an example. My Swedish publisher refrained from publishing this book. And the reasons he gave made me think, okay, this is a class war. Sweden thinks of itself as post-class. But one of the reasons he gave was the people that you criticize in the book are people like us. It's the people who lead the institutions that should be addressing this problem, and they are not. And the sensitive question here is, are they not doing it because they're afraid of being called bigots, or is there more to it? Maybe they don't really see these people with low income, low education, people who live in those neighborhoods. Maybe they just don't see them as worth fighting for. You know, people like Irshad and I are fighting. I don't know. Let me speak for myself. Yeah. For the longest time, it was, we have this radical ideology that's coming from the outside, and it's coming in, and we've got to understand it. You basically had to learn Arabic to understand radical Islam. But now there is this homegrown cancel culture, wokeism, that ideology that I know we're going to talk about later. But there is this maybe more of a European problem, but there is a class issue. Yes, there's people with lower incomes and without college degrees, maybe, they're trashed. They're seen as white trash, they're seen as deplorables. And if they're confronted with, or if they have to carry the burdens of the unintended consequences of immigration and globalization, then so be it. Mm-hmm. And if we go down that path, I think we're going to have a lot of political volatility. And we just had a small taste of it in the last 4 years, but this could get worse.
One of the worst skin problems is trying to deal with acne. As those who suffer with it know, there's no hiding it. It can undermine your self-confidence and even make you depressed. And while prescription acne treatment really works, it's hard to get. You have to take time off work to see a doctor and then sit in a line at the pharmacy for your medications. Well, Apostrophe is here to help. Apostrophe makes it easy to see a board-certified dermatologist online. You'll get treated immediately, and your medications are delivered to your home. Simply fill out Apostrophe's online questionnaire about your skin concerns and medical history, then just snap a few selfies and your dermatologist will get back to you with a customized treatment plan tailored just for you. And the best part is that Apostrophe offers topical, and oral medications. So you can treat your acne from the inside out and the outside in. But Apostrophe isn't only about acne, and that's why I love their products. They help me with my skincare goals, such as reducing redness, wrinkles, and even dark spots. It's also really nice to know I can have a real dermatologist and that my plan was made especially for me. So now you can get $15 off your first visit with a board-certified dermatologist at apostrophe.com/femsplainers and use our code FEMSPLAINERS. This code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/femsplainers and click Begin Visit, and then use the code FEMSPLAINERS at sign up, and you'll get $15 off your dermatology visit. That's apostrophe.com/femsplainers, and use that code FEMSPLAINERS to get your dermatology visit for $15 off. And we thank Apostrophe for sponsoring this podcast. One of the things I want to just go back to the beginning for a moment, Ayaan, is when we asked about why the focus on Muslim men, that you wrote this in the context, and as you point out in the book, that since 2015, the fifth wave of immigration coming into Europe is the largest since World War II. And I remember at the time, and before Angela Merkel sort of famously, or one of her subordinates, opened the borders to these then called refugees, they were, in fact, I mean, we saw many heart-wrenching images of people coming and dying and drowning off boats, and it was terribly moving. And this led to this big compassionate act to let in these refugees, except most of them were migrants traveling from throughout Africa to come to Europe for the opportunity it offered. And as you point out, most of them were young men coming ahead that, and so part of this issue is people want to seem compassionate or be compassionate towards refugees, but in fact, this is not what happened in Europe, and it's a migration problem that we're seeing the world over, and including into the United States, and looking at our inability to integrate these cultures into ours, especially in Europe, where there's very few low-skilled jobs available. Labor is very expensive. And they come in, and just describe some of the background of these young men, of the types of societies. And it's not, as Irshad points out, some of it is Christian, Orthodox Christian, but they're coming from societies where there's polygamy, and the views of women are very low.
Yes, Danielle, I think it is wrong to call this immigration. We are talking about here, we're talking about migration. We're talking about failing states, and some of them are called fragile states. These are governments that can't feed their people, that can't bring about economies that can sustain the populations that live under those governments. And these populations are very young. I'm talking about the populations in Africa, in the Middle East, in many parts of Southern Asia. And because of the low cost of travel, because of the information age, there are very powerful pull factors into Europe, into the United States of America and other wealthy Western liberal governments, states, societies. The push factors range from societies that are completely broken down, like Syria and Somalia, and are incredibly violent, to societies like Eritrea, where men are being forced, young men are being forced into the military, and they don't want to do that, so that they're able to get away. And their families, in all of these cases, their families invest a lot of money into getting the young men out to go somewhere else in search of a better life, and then help their own families. Now, if you look at the existing treaties and laws, that just doesn't fit into that kind of, large groups of human beings just moving away, going. You look at the United Nations Geneva Convention of 1951, it is about people who are individuals who are prosecuted by a government and the other laws that are in place, that those things exist and those laws should remain in place for those specific individuals. But here we're talking about masses and masses and masses of people who are leaving their home countries to go elsewhere. One of the big attractions in Europe is the welfare state. If you want to be a welfare state and you also want to be open to that sort of migration, you are going to have to choose. Either you become a welfare state or you remain a welfare state, or you become a place where people can come and try out there. So there's a lot of very complex layers of transitions that are happening, and legislation is way behind. Programs that deal with in European societies that are supposed to be the host society, you have spontaneous expressions of compassion like Angela Merkel did, where she says, okay, we will welcome this lot. I think that was her thinking at the time. And then what? And then we're going to close the borders. What borders? Whose borders? Mm-hmm. So those people in government positions are just way, way behind when it comes to the reality on the ground.
Ayaan, can I interject here and say, for the sake of our audience, that far from being a book merely about criticism, you've written a book that contains potential solutions, and that is, to be applauded. My question, though, is, what you're up against in terms of being heard. And communicating in very divided times is difficult. I'm the first person to say that if I knew back then what I know today, I would have written my 2 books about the need for reform within Islam in a different way. Namely, I would have pointed out that all human beings, are wired with primitive brains that seek out threats, so that anything that seems either unfamiliar or you're conditioned to see it as, a problem, will instantly make you lash out. In other words, I would have made a much bigger point of the fact that it's not always that Islam or even culture is the main problem. There's a foundational biological problem that all human beings have to deal with, and that religion and culture can be exacerbating forces. Now, I say all of this, Ayaan, because that's what I've learned over the years. I've learned to acknowledge the human problem at the heart of what you and I, are talking about. And when I make that point to people on the so-called other side, their emotional defenses come down because they see that I recognize that there is trouble with us human beings and not just with one religion or one culture. What I'm wondering is, because it is so difficult for solutions like yours to be heard, what have you learned over the years about how to frame and communicate these things in a way that liberals, let's put progressives to the side for a second, liberals may be able to hear? How do you communicate this to those who are otherwise afraid of messages like yours?
So, Irshad, I actually do make it explicit in the book that common humanity, whether it is the positive, which is going off in search of a better life, packing your bags and thinking, maybe I can find, I can spend the rest of my life somewhere where I want to spend the rest of my life. And I also do say that even the negatives are universal. So there's nothing specific to Islam. As in the book, I try to get into the issue of sexual violence. There's nothing specific about Islam. There are differences, however. And in terms of communicating with people and trying to bring them in, I think I do, I don't want to boast, I hate bragging, but I think I do a good job of making it very, very clear that all the human characteristics, whether negative or positive, are universal. However, if you do have societies where polygamy is prevalent, where sexual repression is prevalent, where the attitude towards women is one of contempt, and you take large numbers of men from those societies, and from one day to the next, they are in societies like the ones in Europe, trouble is going to emerge. And so I try and describe that trouble. Now, will there be people who will go straight into a denial mode and be defensive? Absolutely, I expected that. That's why I had to put all of these disclaimers in place. Again, there are so many things right now, and as you point out, it's true, we do live in divisive times. So many things that are competing for the attention of those people we've elected to govern us, our leaders in the media, our leaders in universities and elsewhere. And in the midst of all of that noise and competition, I wanted to push forward this subject where sort of you, me, all of us here who think we are feminists, we want to preserve what we have achieved. We want to fight for the rights and dignity of women who find themselves in places where their rights are compromised. I think the only way to do it is after you've done all the disclaimers and all of that to say, but here is the problem, make it explicit. If you are a young man growing up in a Muslim society, take North Africa, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, or Afghanistan, or Somalia and Eritrea, or any of those places, you are more likely to have been exposed to cultural, political, social, economic pressures that lead you in a way where you are going to be contemptuous of women. And as a woman in those contexts, you've learned to survive that sort of thing. I can say the same thing of European women in the 21st century, not in the Victorian times, not even in the 1950s. There were more similarities between the East and the West in the 1950s than today. But if today we tell young women, you are absolutely and exactly like a man, you can go where he goes, you can do whatever you want. And then we bring in young men from societies where that is different. There are going to be encounters. And in this case, I can say it to you as a woman, I just don't think that it is rational or reasonable for parents to, and teachers and anyone who's looking after a young woman to say in parts of Sweden, parts of Germany, parts of France, parts of the UK, you just go out tonight and be yourself. I think we should try to communicate, yes, and take into account that some people will not listen, but still we can't ignore these things. You asked me the question, what have you learned? Here's what I have learned. When I talked about what radical Islam is all about, and I was exhausted and I got used to being ignored, ISIS came along, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And they started to do all the things that I had been too inhibited to spell out. They were beheading people. They were taking women as slaves. They were quoting from the Quran and the Hadith while doing this. And the question for the people who don't want to listen is, at what stage do you start to open up to see reality? Do you wait for an ISIS-like crisis? Or do you read books like Pray and listen to entreaties, pleadings like mine, like, let's please have this conversation before things get out of control? And I think that responsibility doesn't lie with me or you, it lies with the people who are plugging their ears.
With one exception, Ayaan, and again, I speak from personal experience here, I appreciate how language lands on people. You say, it's not the responsibility of people who don't want to listen. That it is the responsibility of people who don't want to listen to take up these issues. But often, if they don't want to listen, of course, they're not going to take up these issues. But what I have found is that often it's not that people don't want to listen. It's that the way we frame issues can lead to instant suspicions about our motives. For example, in Pray, you use the word assimilate a lot. Now, to the average person out there, there's really no difference between asking an immigrant to assimilate or to integrate. But to people on the left who might otherwise be allies of the cause that you're advocating, it makes a big difference, because assimilation suggests getting rid altogether of the culture from which one comes, whereas integration means having a healthy balance between the two. Even at the beginning of Pray, you make a little jab, to wokeness, right? You say, what you're about to read will trigger you, and it should. I'm just wondering, why do that?
So one is that, as you know, if you are ever you're dealing with editors and writers, and you're always asked to be brief and concise. Nobody's going to read a 2,000-page book where I will digress into the differences between the word assimilate and integrate and so on. And so the whole, in terms of communicating through books, is keep it concise, make it readable, make your points, and show the data. So a lot of my time in this process went into, here are the steps that I have taken to show you that I'm trying to make a point. I've got all my disclaimers and so on. The point I'm making is that in terms of when we take values, there are values that you can't reconcile. So when you say, are you asking people to throw away their culture and their religion? Of course, I've had that question many times in the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. And we always arrive at the same point, and it's been debated and it's been discussed ad nauseum. Your food, your attire, your music, your rituals of birth and marriage and death, no one wants to take that away from you. But if you come in and you say, I see women as commodities, I have 2 wives, I want a third. There are values that we've decided are values we want to fight for, and they can't be reconciled. Well, I think that is in many ways the subject of this book, because when we talk, whether we call it integration, assimilation, or for instance, in Israel, it's called absorption. Immigrant communities are absorbed into the society. That absorption entails norms, values, etc. But as we negotiate how to live with one another and how to coexist with one another, we are going at some point to have to put on the table what is non-negotiable. Life, liberty, bodily integrity, the way we treat our women, that sort of thing is non-negotiable. Am I really bad at communicating that? Maybe. But I do want to communicate that there are values, that there are things that you can't negotiate. And I do want to challenge European leadership to say, you've said forever and ever that you will not negotiate the rights and freedoms of women. Now, here's what's happening in practice. They're being harassed, they're being groped, they're being raped and gang raped. And in so many of these countries, you are turning a blind eye to the plight of these women, just as you turned a blind eye to the immigrant women who were forced into child marriage, who were forced into female genital mutilation. We say these things, we say they are non-negotiable, but is it really true? And so it is really important to ask these questions. And I can go and grovel, I can go and do, try my best to get people on the left who then will say, I'm triggered, or make the argument that only people from within those communities are allowed to say certain things. Well, I am from within those communities. I'm, for heaven's sake, from Somalia, and I grew up a Muslim. So if I can't make that argument, then Danielle can't. Neither can Kai, because they're white women and they're being told, stick to what you know. You're not allowed to talk about this issue. So how on earth can we get to that common humanity where all of us, regardless of our skin color, regardless of our class, regardless of our religion, we can say we agree on promoting women's rights, freedom of speech, all of these gains, without having to devote thousands and thousands and thousands of words on the semantics. I mean, if you're an intelligent person who went to college, you read, pray, come on, for heaven's sake, you know what I'm saying. And yes, you know about trigger warnings and you know about woke culture. And there is a bit of, just like my editor tells me with every sentence, don't digress, just get to the point. That's exactly what I've tried to do in Pray.
Yeah. All I'm saying, Ayaan, is that I think it's a question of how you frame the message and not just what you say. But listen, on the basics, you and I are sisters. And
yes,
I thank you. I thank you for writing a book that needs to be discussed. And I'm with you in wanting, the message to finally come out into the open. Let it be a conversation starter, not an ender.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Ayaan, thank you. I know we've come to the end of the time with you, and I think one of the things that you are saying and what was so profound in this book is that liberal feminism is just throwing up its arms at the thought of protecting these hard-won rights that we've had, that to stand up for liberal democracy is somehow seen as elitist or white. And certainly you have many, many anecdotes in the book of what is happening to women in these countries, in European countries, the crimes, the horrors. So very grateful to you for standing up for this and for standing up for all of us. And as always, just absolutely love having you on the program, and thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you so much, Ayaan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Irshad. Thank you, Kai. I just loved having this conversation with you. And Danielle, on the anecdote side, I think that is the one thing that I would say to most people, just try and get through those anecdotes without breaking down.
Yeah, I was triggered. I appreciated the warning. They were horrific, including the details of what, and I'd forgotten this, what happened to Lara Logan, the reporter, who, oh God.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Unbelievable. You should have her on.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to trigger her again, my goodness, but all right. Thank you, Ayaan. Okay, Nat, this ad is for Upstart. Last year showed us that you never know what life is going to throw at you. And if you use credit cards to pay for unexpected expenses, it can be overwhelming to manage that debt. Take control with Upstart so you know exactly what to expect. Upstart is the fast and easy way to get a personal loan to pay off your debt, all online. Whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 500,000 people have used Upstart to get a simple, fixed monthly payment. Upstart finds smarter rates with trusted partners because they assess more than just your credit score. With a 5-minute online rate check, you can see your rate upfront for loans from $1,000 to $50,000. You can get approved the same day and can receive funds as fast as 1 business day. So if debt is taking over your life, it's time to get a fresh start with Upstart. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/femsplain. That's upstart.com/femsplain. Don't forget to use our URL to let them know we sent you. Loan amounts will be determined based on your credit income and certain other information provided in your loan application. So go to upstart.com/femsplain and start taking control of your debt. Well, thank you, Irshad, for joining that conversation. I was just happy to sit and honestly listen to most of it. with the mention of Lara Logan, I realized, those who don't know, she was the TV journalist who was just surrounded in a square in Egypt and brutally raped.
Sexually assaulted. Yeah.
But one of the things that I was thinking as Ayaan was talking is thinking of all the little Ayaans who may still be out there. That here was Ayaan, as she tells us in the podcast I mentioned at the top, told us how learning English from reading Western romance novels, and also believing that there was this world outside of this otherwise very repressive world that she lived in, and then having the courage to leave it. I thought, like, in thinking about immigration in these situations, want to know, how do we find the Ayaans, the next, and the male Ayaans who are there too?
To be honest, I think that was one of the big missing pieces in Pray. There are so many young Muslim women and men throughout Europe who are working for change, not just within their families, not just within their religious and cultural communities, but even in mainstream society. And I think one of the things that listeners ought to know is that when Muslims and others do good things, they're not going to make the headlines. Nobody makes headlines by doing what ought to be done. We make headlines when we do what ought not to be done. And so let's not, fall into the trap of believing that because there is a situation that needs to be discussed, I'm the first person to say it needs to be discussed, that it is never going to be solved. We've got to shine a light on the bright spots as well. And Ayaan is one of the bright spots. And, I have spoken with her about also continuing to shine the light on other bright spots so that we can get a true picture of where the hope is and not just where the despair is. I'm so glad that she continues to break silences. There's very few people, obviously, will do that because it takes guts. Right. But now, as she said, let the conversation begin. And as part of the conversation, let's also, congratulate and encourage those whose names we don't know, but who do the work in their communities and who'll never have their own books published. They deserve to have our support.
Right. Well, thank you for being part of the conversation, Irshad. Thanks for joining me as always. And we'll see you again soon, I hope.
I hope so. In person, maybe.
Maybe in person. Oh my God.
What a novel concept.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Irshad. And thank you. We'll see you all next time. The Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers. And get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Nat Frum.